Welcome to Funding and Disrupting, the most in-depth business podcast for companies looking to raise money and the investors who fund them. Every episode, we interview a funded founder, plus the investor who funded them, to get the real story of how it all came together. If you're searching for funding for a disruptive technology or business, or you're searching for the best companies to invest in, then you've come to the right place. This episode of Funding and Disrupting is brought to you by Aura Collective, a leading tech PR and marketing firm. Let's get funding and disrupting.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Keith Herman, and welcome to today's episode of Funding and Disrupting. Today, my special guests are Jose Luis Silva and Brian York. Jose Luis Silva is the co-founder and managing partner of Dux Capital. Dux is an early-stage VC firm investing in US-based Latinx founders. They provide funding to groups that have been historically underinvested, overlooked, and underrepresented. Brian York is the co-founder and CEO of Cubbo. Cubbo is a Latin American technology company that fulfills e-commerce orders for direct-to-consumer brands. They are building the largest urban warehouse fulfillment network throughout LatAm, which allows them to be the only solution in the region to be able to do the same day fulfillment. Cubbo software is fully integrated with e-commerce platforms, including Shopify, VTEX, Mercado Libre, and many more. Their headquarters is in Bogota, Colombia, and they are operating in Bogota and Mexico City. So without further ado, I welcome Jose Luis and Brian. How are you, gentlemen?
Very good. Thank you very much for this great invitation.
Yeah, doing well. Excited to be here.
Terrific. Thanks for being with us today. Why don't we start by each one of you telling us where exactly you are today? How about you, Jose Luis? Where are you?
Sure. Thank you very much. So I'm in Austin, Texas, where I live with my wife and kids, and running Dux Capital for 7 years now, and I'm very grateful to be here.
Yeah, and I'm actually in the house I grew up in Boston, south of Boston, close to Cape Cod. I'm in the room that actually I grew up in, just coincidentally. I was in New York for business the last couple of days, so I shot up here for the weekend because it's my niece's birthday, and then headed back to Sao Paulo, Brazil, where I live full time. And we operate in Brazil as well. So we're in Colombia, Mexico, and Brazil. But yeah, so I'm full time in Sao Paulo, but happen to be here in south of Boston.
You're all over the place. I was looking. So Sao Paulo, Bogota, Mexico City, but now you're in Boston. So
yeah, visiting family. Yeah.
Terrific. So we're gonna talk about that a little bit later on, because I always find logistics interesting in terms of where people are, where they're traveling, what they're doing in terms of opportunities. So we're gonna touch on that later. But for now, let's talk a bit about Dux. So Jose Luis, why don't you tell us who your partners are, how you met, and how you decided on the name for your company?
Sure. Thank you very much for that. So it goes back to a long story with Daniel Santamarina. Daniel and I are Mexican, born and raised. We were friends since middle school, and actually we didn't get along really well when we were kids. But once we got old, when I came back from my MBA in Europe, in Spain and in Asia, in Singapore, I came back to Mexico, and with Daniel's background in entrepreneurship and my background in investment banking for more than 9 years for a big bank, we decided that the best way to attack our passion towards investing in startups was to create a venture capital fund. So we created Dux. Dux is leader in Latin, and that's where it comes from. I remember back in 2016 when we started this, we in a napkin we decided the name. So that's how everything started. And we started as an investment banking boutique to help entrepreneurs, but quickly we understood and wanted to move to the buy side. So since we started, our main goal is to help our community, our Latin community specifically. Fortunately, we're the largest minority in the US, around 18% of the population, but only 2% of the venture capital money flows into our community. So our main goal is to reduce that gap between those two variables, and that's why we invest in early stage startups for Latinos. In our second fund, we're now raising our second fund. We have Susana Espinosa de los Reyes coming to our GP, coming as a partner. That has been amazing, not only because she is exceptional and very intelligent, but also she is one of the few women GPs in the Latin community. Unfortunately, that number is very, very low as well. And Susana is a linchpin on Latinas in our region and in the US as well. So that's a little bit of our partners and the intro of our fund.
How many companies presently are in the Dux portfolio? And have you had any exits so far?
Yeah, so in Fund 1, we did 17 investments with already one exit, and actually in the delivery, in the last mile delivery industry, in which a Colombian company bought our Mexican startup, and we receive a lot of startups per week, around 15 to 20 startups every week, and we have a very, very large pipeline of startups, because fortunately today, when an entrepreneur wants to raise money and we go to the internet or try to find out who is there, fortunately Dux is a hit on their search, and this has been constructed for the past 7 years, as I said. So yeah, in fund number 2, we're gonna write 20 checks for 20 startups. So when we finish our fund 2, around 40 startups. And that will continue in funds 3, 4, 5, and
give us the range of the checks that Dux writes for investors.
Right. So it's $1 million checks. So and that's an average, but we can go as low as 100K. But we understood in Fund 1 that an institutional investor has to be long term. So that first check flows into additional checks of follow-on investments in the future. So a VC reinvest in the best portfolio companies they see, and that's how we do 50% of our fund. It's reserved for follow-on.
Terrific. Explain to us how you operate in terms of who decides which companies get funded. In other words, is there an investment committee that's comprised of the founding members, or is there an independent committee? How does that work?
Sure. So, all right. First of all, I like the flow of this. So every week, all these startups come in, and we understood that we couldn't do it with our team of 9 people. So we had to invest in technology. So the first filter we have, whenever a startup comes in, it's an intelligent tech filter in which our system will ask the founder like around 30 questions, 10-minute questionnaire online, and that decision trees in our technology would tell us if that startup will fit to our thesis. If it does fit, then a human interaction starts. So analysts would get it to the startup or to the founder and ask for a first meeting. So from there, if the boxes are checked with our analysts, then they bring that startup to our first internal committee, in which Susana, Daniel, and myself and the rest of the team would decide if we want to either send a term sheet or continue the process. So that's very important, because we also learned and understood that the GPs in the funds are the ones that should decide on the investments. The good thing about being a GP is that we have great advisors and great investors that will help us decide on the best startups and the great decisions. So that when we, in that internal committee, when we decide on continuing with the startup, then we go to a first investment committee. in which we bring advisors. Actually, Brian is not only our portfolio company, but also advisor of my fund. They come in and depending on the industry of the startups that we bring to the investment committee, we bring XYZ advisor that is specialized in that industry. And there we decide on with the external team of advisors to execute a due diligence or to stop the process. So if we decide to continue, we make a fast due diligence. And if the due diligence is positive, then we start the investment process. That's the general path of our investments.
I find it interesting that you implemented software to funnel your deals and to analyze them, which is a great sign that venture capital has moved forward. A lot of people think of it very old school, a couple of old guys in the back room sifting through papers. But I'm just curious, is the software that you have, is that proprietary software or is that an out-of-the-box?
It's half and half because we use a software that makes us develop what we want to develop inside that software. So we use that platform, but we had to code and to develop our own technology. So it's half and half.
Interesting. You're actually developing technology yourself for your VC fund. So
exactly.
Yeah, that's great. So let's transition now to one of your investments, Cubbo. Dux recently invested in Cubbo as one of the lead investors. So how were you introduced to them, and describe your first meeting with them?
Yeah, so I remember very well this question and this moment. So when I started, I was introduced to Brian in 2016 or 2017. I don't recall really well, but one of my friends in Colombia, Diego Santamaria, made the intro. I don't know if you remember Brian, but and very quickly, in a personal level, we connected. It was amazing. I learned a lot about Brian because he was doing his, I think, fourth startup, and I'll let him, of course, talk about it. And unfortunately, I couldn't invest in that one because we were not ready in Dux. We didn't have our first closing, and we wanted to invest. And I remember that it was like weeks between deciding it or not. But the good thing is that we maintained our relationship. We always had at least a call once a year, more or less, 1-2 times a year to see how we were doing. And since both are Latinx and with the same family values, I consider him my friend. So when he exited his fourth startup, he decided to open up Cubbo. We're reconnected, and Brian, very, very grateful for that. Brian invited us to invest. We were ready, and we did invest.
Wonderful. So Brian, why don't you tell us more about Cubbo? For instance, what makes it different than any other company, and why you believe, or what you believe the potential for its growth is?
Sure. So we're an e-commerce fulfillment business operating across Latin America, specifically in Mexico, Colombia, and in Brazil. We focus on the warehouse operations. So we receive inventory from e-commerce brands, mostly local brands, but our largest customers are international, which is one of the most exciting things for me. And part of the reason that I was in New York, as I described earlier. But so we take in the inventory into our warehouse, and we pick and pack as the orders come in, and we ship the orders out for the delivery, integrating with multiple carriers in every country. And we take care of the customer service and the reverse logistics as well. So in Latin America, there's not like this space just became, and previously I had built a truck delivery business, which is now the largest last mile truck delivery platform in Latin America. And I started that company is called Lifted. I started that with some other founders in 2016. I've been in startups my whole career. But Lifted was my first exposure into supply chain. I built that. We scaled that business to 18 cities, 5 countries across Latin America, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, Chile, and Ecuador. So that gave me some great experience in supply chain. I had done the delivery part. I love to operate. And so when I looked into supply chain, warehousing naturally kind of called me back. So when I'm in Sao Paulo, I'm usually at the warehouse. Probably good that I'm not there because it would be a lot of background noise. But yeah, so the space in general for e-commerce fulfillment is relatively new. There are a handful of players across the region right now, but and then we also compete against traditional 3PL across the region. And traditional 3PL, they're decent, but they're more optimized for refilling retail. They have large racks, and so everything's in bundles. So in order to pick and pack in real time, they have to get a forklift, take things off the shelf, unpack it. And there's a big lack of technology as well. So the startups that are competing in that space have an unfair advantage because we're innovating faster, iterating quicker. And so the difference with Cubbo is our warehouses are actually inside the city. So our first warehouse in Mexico, we actually found an abandoned gymnasium, which we repurposed. It is a 3,000 square meter space right outside of Polanco. So that allows us to actually pick, pack, and ship and deliver same day with 5 p.m. cutoff times in Mexico. So in the US, generally, it's like a 2-day shipping, but we're actually able to do same day shipping with 5 p.m. cutoff times. In Mexico, we actually 6 p.m. in Sao Paulo, and these are huge cities. We're able to do so because of our technology and our location in the city. And then one of the last differentiating things for us is we put a lot of resources into partnering with brands globally. So as I had alluded to and talked about previously, I was just in New York. We just brought in Dossier, which is a high-end perfume brand. They had basically never done any sales in Latin America previously, but were bullish on expanding to different regions outside of US. We contacted them at the right time about a year ago. It took about a year to close, and they just sent us their first 16,000 units of perfume on a container into our warehouse. And in the first month, they did 2,000 orders, and they're ramping up to do 1,000 to 1,500 orders a day within 120 days, which is phenomenal. And so that's just one example, but we work with a handful of other companies across the US, moisturizer brands, cosmetic brands, apparel brands. We have a lot of brands in Europe as well now sending us containers to Colombia and Mexico as well. We're trying to get that set up for Brazil, but it's harder to do the importation in Brazil. There's a lot of bureaucracy. And so that's a big differentiator for us. We put a lot of resources and focus onto optimizing the process of getting international brands into the country with their inventory. So in-country fulfillment into our warehouse, there's a lot of moving parts to that. And we've gotten pretty good at that process.
Over the last couple of years, I've spent a lot of time in Mexico and South America. Specifically the countries you mentioned, Colombia and Brazil. Tell us, what is the dynamic? Why Sao Paulo? Why Mexico City, Polanco? Why, Bogota? What is it about these cities? Because a lot of people that are listening don't really know what's going on in LatAm and the opportunities. So why don't you kind of connect the dots for people who are not quite up to date on what's going on down there?
Yeah, definitely. So, well, I sort of personally am driven to be in Latin America. So I was born in Bogota, and I was adopted, and I grew up in this house and south of Boston. So I've always wanted to get back to Latin America and get reconnected to my biological family, which I am now. And so that was like my main driver back in 2016. And having been in startups my whole career, I had done 3 in San Francisco. And so basically right off the plane, I was like really stubborn. Like even before I got to Bogota, I knew I was like, once I get there, I'm going to start something. I don't know what it is, but I have to, not only do I want to find my family, but I want to start a startup in Colombia. How cool would that be? And so that was like my initial motivation. And then was able to get lucky and find a really good problem with Lifted, the truck on-demand truck delivery company. And what I had learned was at the time, 2016, 17, it was early days. Not a lot of people wanted to touch Latin America. It was challenging to fundraise. It was challenging to find talent. But there was, at least for me, being feet on the ground, it was becoming super obvious at that time that there was a ton of opportunity and some really good comps in the market, specifically in Colombia. Rappi was had just gotten over $1 billion valuation. That was like the big buzz in Colombia, and you could feel like there were at that time there was employees leaving and starting their own startups, and you could feel like, wow, like something's happening here. You could feel the same thing happening when I visited Mexico as well at the time. So fast forward to today, it's completely different. Everybody and their grandmother wants to invest into the region. There's a ton of really talented entrepreneurs. At one point, I felt like I saw every deal in Colombia, but now it's like I probably see less than 1%. There's just so many good deals coming up, but it's still like the second inning of a baseball game. There's still a long way to go. The next 10 years is going to be phenomenal for Latin America. I am definitely not leaving anytime soon. I could have taken some time off after lifted, but at that time, it was 2.5 years ago, 2 years ago. That was like the inflection point. Latin America was just taking off, and there was no way I was going to sit by the pool and wait, like watch this moment of time go past me by. I had to get back into the game, but it's still super early. So there's a lot of markets and niches that are just completely untouched. But even the niches that have one or two strong competitors in, there's still a lot of room for other competitors to get in there and compete, because a lot of the businesses that you can do in Latin America, you don't just launch in Colombia and then scale in Colombia. It is really a region take off from Monterrey down to Sao Paulo. And that's one of the things that excites me. I'm living in Sao Paulo since March of this year, but I'll probably next year be living in Mexico City. I have a house in Bogota, so I try to get back there as much as I can. So it is like one of the things, you're just racing across the region and have the chance to really build something interesting.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, there's several people from Colombia that went down to Sao Paulo. Simon Barrero, and you have David Velez, who went from Nubank. So it seems like it's very popular, and people are, moving around geographically and trying to make things happen there. And it's great to see these successes. So yeah, so I'm glad that you could share that. So I want to go back a little bit in time here, Brian, and talk about the first meeting that you had with Dux. And more specifically, like as a founder, what was your feeling when you went into that first meeting, and what were you feeling over the course of the meeting and as you left? Because as an entrepreneur, people want to know what was the journey like. So share with us what you were feeling as you were going through that initial meeting with them.
Yeah, I mean, I love meeting with first time GPs. And so with Dux and meeting with Jose Luis, they were starting their first fund themselves. So they were like entrepreneurs building their first fund, just like a startup. So when you talk to funds that have been around, and there's bureaucracy, there's associates, then go to VP, to then the GPs, and like that's nice, but there's kind of like this boring process, and this is a boring process to get through there. But with new and emerging managers, there's always kind of this edge to them, because they have to hustle to prove themselves. And so getting back to your question, when I met Jose Luis the first time, he oozed that feeling of like he was running around husling, trying to do business development meetings, meet new people, and grow his brand and grow personal brand, but also the Dux brand as well. So and we had some common friends as well that worked really well. So I remember the first meeting I had with Jose Luis was, I believe it was in person. We had breakfast in Mexico, and a lot of the time we were just catching up on life and catching up on like how we went to school, and like it wasn't really about business. We were just like, it was more personable. So and that's what we can really get from new and emerging managers. That's what I really like.
Jose Luis, what was the single most appealing element that you found to Brian's project?
His persona, his team. I mean, I'm all about teams. You can have an awful product, but if you have an amazing team, they will make it happen. So here they have both. So it's a great person, as I said, with the same values that I have in the personal aspect, with an amazing opportunity in front of them, and a great product that attacked that opportunity. So for me, it was a no-brainer. The combination of team and the product Cubbo has, it was so easy to go forward. And that's the beauty about Cubbo, led by a great team and massive opportunities. So yeah, it was very, very nice to be there at that moment.
Brian, why don't you tell us in some detail the due diligence process you went through with Dux and how long that took? What was it like working with them? What was it that they asked from you?
What was interesting is, and this was a coincidence,
or was it a deal off the napkin, like choosing the name of the company?
It was a little bit of both, actually. So
Yeah.
we kind of randomly connected. I was in between startups, and at the time I had some rough idea for Cubbo, but the original idea was actually to do like the same strategy of having space inside the city, but to do self-storage services. So I had touched base with Jose Luis so early that I believed my first pitch to him in the car. I remember I was driving, and I think he was as well. So very like informal, like just catching up. But I told him about this rough idea of like, hey, I want to like try to find space and transform space so I could like do self-storage services. And so I could just remember like Jose Luis just getting excited to partner with me, and kind of like to Jose Luis's like point is like the product can be like betting on the team, but the product could be like not that great. Like the team will figure it out. So for us, we actually did self-storage services for a couple of weeks. And then we realized like this is not what we want to build, and we completely pivoted to now doing e-commerce fulfillment with some overlap because we're still like optimization of urban space. And so he was super early, but definitely bullish on the team. And then the process, we still had to go through his process, which I respected. It was some light due diligence because at the time we basically was just a concept and a pitch deck. He met the other founders that I was going to do this business with. And then I remember doing an EIC. So we had it was over Zoom, and there was like 10 other people on the call. And I think by that time it was like mid-January. So a month had gone by, but mostly because of the holidays. And by that time, I think we had pivoted away from self-storage. So I think like that might have taken Jose Luis by surprise of like first call self-storage investment committee pitching for something completely different. But yeah, it was relatively fast and relatively simple because we didn't really have anything. We were still just basically concept stage at that time. And it was more of them just digging in on us as the team and understanding the initial people we were putting around the project.
So what would you say technically was the most challenging part of closing the transaction?
No, I think like going through the IC process and getting prepared for that, but it was still pretty straightforward because it was so early. I'm sure like if we had more traction and had financials, and I'm sure they would have had the chance to dig in more, but that's sort of like what Dux likes to find is like those really early deals. And because of that, there's not a lot to dig in on except to the team.
Brian, what advice would you give other technology founders if they were interested in having Dux as an investor? What advice would you share with them?
They're relatively easy to reach out to. So, Jose Luis, stop me if I'm wrong, but I think if you message you over LinkedIn or find a way to WhatsApp you, I'm sure you would answer. I know you have a process as well of like, having the analyst, but, that doesn't stop them of being able to reach out to them. And then it's pretty easy to get a warm intro. Like everyone has a LinkedIn account, so you can find who's these Dux is connected to. They have a deep network, so getting a warm intro is pretty easy, or befriending one of their portfolio companies who can then give you the intro to them. But just in general, the guys are very approachable, so I think a lot of the time they would respond to a cold message.
Yeah, remember that you are the rock stars, the entrepreneurs, not the investors. So you have to always be available for all these entrepreneurs, and for me, that's the main driver to respect their time, respect the process, and always try to be very communicative and very open, because that's where my business comes.
Yeah, let's talk about that for a second, because obviously communication is really important, right? Communicating with founders, discussing things, having an open door. A lot of companies, they're seeing not 15 deals a week, they're seeing 15 deals an hour. So obviously you're different. And I always hear, we're different because we're hands-on and we do this, that, and the other. Why don't you tell us, Jose Luis, what it is that you bring to the table and how you help the companies, help them, whether it's, to solve problems or to help them, with connections. Let's talk specifically, what does Dux do to help their portfolio companies?
So our smart money towards our portfolio companies, it has several variables. The first one is that we are fundamentalists, and that's been very common, especially this month. But we started like that. And when I say fundamentalist, is that we really try to invest as a leader. We always lead our rounds, but also with solid fundamentals and not only a FOMO situation, for example. So by saying that, we are a very active but non-invasive investor. So we talk daily with our portfolio companies. We usually take a seat in their board. If there's not a board, we try to create it with the startup, especially in the seed stages. We try to mimic a board. I call it a virtual board, in which we want to be part of it, and as I said, not being invasive. So we try to help out in the strategic decisions. For example, if the company is going to perform an M&A, of course we want to participate in that decision. But if Brian is going to hire $50,000 engineer, well, that's a day-to-day operations. We don't want to be there because we know that Brian is the best one to decide that. So that's the way we work on a daily basis. We always have either a Slack team group or a WhatsApp group. We always communicate every quarter and every month, actually. We try to get info from the portfolio companies in order to report it back to our investors and back to our teams. Every quarter, we develop a report very similar to the public companies reports quarterly. And every year, we try to do also an audit and an annual report. So that way, together with the asks, that's very important. You have to be ready to help out whenever the founders will ask for something. There's a lot of inbound around that. So if Brian wants to get hold of someone in XYZ corporation, he will come to us and we will try to provide that intro, that network. And that can happen in not only network, but in different things, hirings, new technologies, new service providers, etc. So it's a relationship, a daily relationship and a weekly relationship.
What advice would you give tech founders that are in the early stage of raising capital?
So the hustle. So when I raised our first fund, I had to go see like 700 people and 25 invested. So expect the same in
how large was that? How large was that?
It was a micro VC. It was $7.5 million fund, which at that moment for Mexico, we started off in Mexico and finished it as a regional fund. That was the size and sufficient to build the brand and invest in 17 startups. So the advice is that the VCs, fortunately and unfortunately, see a lot of pipelines, as you said. So the founders have to understand that and try to get hold of the team and be patient and really go and hustle in the market to look after all these investors, but look at it in an intelligent way. Try to find the thesis of the VCs. We receive a lot of pipeline that if they're raising $100 million, I'm not that investor. Or if they're raising their first friends and family round, I'm not that investor. So always try to see the thesis of the fund before going to the fund. So that way, the time of the founder and the time of the fund can be well executed and not losing time for both.
Terrific. So, Jose Luis, how may our audience get in touch if they're interested in investing in your fund or co-investing or seeking capital?
Sure. So we have a link for that first questionnaire that I told you about earlier. So I would be glad to give it to everyone. And my email, as Brian said, we're very open to receive everyone. Of course, it's difficult, but I will always respond. And I can provide both the link to our investment process. And
sure. Why don't you share that with us? How can they get in touch?
Sure. So, I mean, the link is difficult to provide it. So probably I can give it to you and you can give it to the audience. So how can we do it? So my mail is jl@duxcapital.vc. And the link, I would be happy to send it to anyone that sends me an email. Probably that's the best way.
Terrific. And how about you, Brian? How can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, I respond to every cold message, no matter who you are. The trick for me is just keep it short, like 2 sentences max, just get to the point. And so my main email is Brian, BRIAN @cubbo.com, CUBBO.com, and then or LinkedIn as well. So I'm active on LinkedIn. So a short message on email or LinkedIn, I'll always respond.
Fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing your time and your experience with us today. We wish you both the best in your endeavors. That's it for today's interview. If you're a VC firm or tech company founder and like to share your interesting story, please visit us at fundingdisrupting.com, where you may learn more and complete the interview application. Thanks again for joining us. And until next time, keep funding and disrupting.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Funding and Disrupting. Don't forget to visit our sponsor, auraco.com, to learn more about working directly with Aura Collective's exclusive technology PR team. They'll help you craft your message, get noticed in the press, and help you get your venture to the funding finish line. Again, you can visit them at www.auraco.com. Keep funding and keep disrupting.